Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Yashodanandana Jagannathana Yashodanandana Jagannathana Janana Jamuna Shira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Yashodanandana Jagannathana Yashodanandana Jagannathana Janna Sridham Varnasrama Jaya Radha Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Jaya Radha, Madhav, Jaya Radha, Madhav, Jai Shri Sri Radha Madhava ki, Jai Shri Prabhupada ki, Gaur Premanand. Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Pri Vrajagacharya Stotra Satya Sri Simad His Divine Grace Srila Bhai Charanarvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Sri Prabhupada ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki ISKCON DBT Founder Acharyas Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Samavata Bhakti Vrinda ki Harinam Sankirtan ki Grantara Srimad-Bhagavatam ki Jai Nitai Gaur Pimanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga, all glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Sarakaya Taksurandiritam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhuktale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Jita Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabhadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakanvitam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kancana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Devi Pranamame Hare Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyaevascha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Ram Chaiva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Before reciting the Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, let us first offer respectful obeisances unto Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayana Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta Prayasha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamashloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. By regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering a service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed practically to nil, and loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasamhitam Uttama Charitam Chakara Bhagavan Rishi Nishreyasaya Lokasya Dhanyam Swasyaya Namaha. This Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantara, as the king of all literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, the Srila Vyasadeva. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Mukam karoti vāchanam pāgum langayate girim yatkripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinatam. Yatkripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinatam. Hare Krishna. Welcome to our Selamat Datang. Selamat pagi, Selamat Datang. Good morning and welcome to our Bhagavatam class. Continuing in the Bab Tuju, 7th Canto. Huh? Oh, Babli Mablas. Skanda Tuju, Skanda. Skanda means canto, Skanda. Bab means chapter. And Shloka means sloka. And Pat Puludua. Yeah, and Pat Puludua means 42. Okay, text 42. Okay. Yeah, long. Little longer and different meter. Okay. Aksham dasha pranam adharma dharmo. Aksham dasha pranam adharma dharmo. Aksham dasha pranam adharma dharmo. Chakre bhimanam ratinam chajivam. Chakre bhimanam ratinam chajivam. Dhanurhitasya pranavam patanti. Dhanurhitasya pranavam patanti. Saram tujivam param eva lakshyam. Saram tujivam param eva lakshyam. Aksham dasha pranam adharma dharma. Chakre bhimanam ratinam chajivam. Dhanurhitasya pranavam patanti. Sharam tujivam param eva lakshyam. Aksham dasha pranam adharma dharma. Chakre bhimanam ratinam chajivam. Dhanurhitasya pranavam patanti. Saram tujivam param eva lakshyam. aksham dashapat aksham dashapram dharma dharma chakre bhimanam ratinam chajivam dhanurhitasya pranavam patanti Haram tujivam patram eva laksham aksham, the spokes on the chariot wheel, dasha, 10, pranam, the 10 kinds of air flowing within the body, adharma, irreligion, dharma, religion, 2 sides of the wheel, up and down, chakre, in the wheel, abhimanam, false identification, ratinam, the charioteer or master of the body, cha, also, jivam, the living entity, dhanuhu, the bow, he, indeed, tasya, his, pranavam, the Vedic mantra, omkara, patanti, it is said, saram, an arrow, 2, but jivam, the living entity, param, the Supreme Lord, eva, indeed, lakshyam, the target. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. The 10 kinds of air acting within the body are compared to the spokes of the chariot's wheels, and the top and bottom of the wheel itself are called religion and irreligion. The living entity in the bodily concept of life is the owner of the chariot. The Vedic mantra pranava is the bow, the pure living entity itself is the arrow, and the target is the Supreme Being. Kindly repeat after me. The 10 kinds of air acting within the body are compared to the spokes of the chariot's wheels, and the top and bottom of the wheel itself are called religion and irreligion. The living entity in the bodily concept of life is the owner of the chariot. The Vedic mantra pranava is the bow. The pure living entity himself is the arrow, and the target is the Supreme Being. Report. 10 kinds of life air always flow within the material body. They are called prana, apana, prana, apana, samana, vyana, udana, naga, kurma, krikala, devadatta, and dhananjaya. They are compared here to the spokes of the chariot's wheels. The life air is the energy for all of the living entities' activities, which are sometimes religious and sometimes irreligious. Thus, religion and irreligion are said to be the upper and lower portions of the chariot's wheels. When the living entity decides to go back home, back to Godhead, his target is Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the conditioned state of life, one does not understand that the goal of life is the Supreme Lord. Nate vidu svarthagatim hi Vishnum durashaya ye bahir artha manina. The living entity tries to be happy within this material world, not understanding the target of his life. When he is purified, however, he gives up his bodily conception of life and his false identity as belonging to a certain community, a certain nation, a certain society, a certain family, and so on. Sarvapadi vinir muktam tat paradena nirmalam. Then he takes the arrow of his purified life, and with the help of the bow, the transcendental chanting of pranava, or the Hare Krishna mantra, he throws himself toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has commented that because the word bow and arrow are used in this verse, one might argue that the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity have become enemies. However, although the Supreme Personality of Godhead may become the so-called enemy of the living being, that is his chivalrous pleasure. For example, the Lord fought with Bhishma, and when Bhishma pierced the Lord's body on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, this was a kind of humor or relation of which there are 12. When the conditioned soul tries to reach the Lord by hurling an arrow at him, the Lord takes pleasure, and the living entity gains the profit of going back home, back to Godhead. Another example given in this regard is that Arjuna, as a result of piercing the Adhara Mina, or the fish within the chakra, achieved the valuable gain of Draupadi. Similarly, if with the arrow of chanting the holy name of the Lord one pierces Lord Vishnu's lotus feet by dint of performing this heroic activity of devotional service, one receives the benefit of returning home back to Godhead. Translation again. The 10 kinds of air within acting within the body are compared to the spokes of the chariot's wheels, and the top and bottom of the wheel itself are called religion and irreligion. The living entity in the bodily concept of life is the owner of the chariot. The Vedic mantra, pranava, is the bow. The pure living entity itself, himself, is the arrow, and the target is the Supreme Being. So again, we are being reminded, this analogy is being given here, about different types of air. Most of us are not understanding that there is different types of air circulation within the body. When there is imbalance in air circulation, one becomes diseased. Sometimes different types of mental illness, mental disease is caused by imbalance in the movement of the air. In Navadvip, during the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, out of intense ecstatic feelings, he would sometimes fall unconscious. He would sometimes throw himself on the ground and remain unconscious. And he would sometimes give as an excuse that, oh, the airs of in my body became disturbed, therefore I became unconscious. Just like sometimes we experience that also. We may experience if we get up too quickly, and then we have to sit down because, yeah, we become dizzy and possibly unconscious. So this body is a vehicle, and we must understand that this vehicle is meant to be properly utilized in Krishna's service. The nice example is being given here of the bow and the arrow. The body is a vehicle that is human body, human form of life is that special vehicle that can facilitate or enable us to come out of the bodily platform. Animals that cannot do that. Other lower species of life don't have that ability or possibility. Why? Because it requires developed consciousness, kasadaran Krishna, Krishna consciousness. Yeah, and here the example of the of the bow and arrow. Yeah. The how's that nicely given here? The Vedic mantra pranava is the bow. The jiva, the atma, jivatma, the pure living entity is the arrow, and the target is Krishna. So therefore, It means that we have the possibility in the human form of life, by taking help from this bow. This bow means the transcendental sound vibration of the holy name. By the transcendental sound vibration of the holy name, we can reach our target, which is the lotus feet of the Lord. Actually, in the same way that the jiva, living entity, actually does not belong to the material world. The jiva, like the holy name, belongs to the spiritual world. Golokera Primadhana Harinama Sankirtan. This Harinam, this name of Hari, this transcendental sound vibration, this Om transcendental sound vibration, the mantra, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra mantra, they are transcendental sound vibration that actually don't belong to the material world. They directly come from the spiritual world. So this is what is being explained here, that by taking assistance of these two things, by combining together, just like a bow by itself or an arrow by itself cannot do so much, but when you combine a good strong bow with a suitable arrow, then one becomes well equipped to actually reach the target. So the pure living entity is compared to that arrow, and the chanting of the holy name. So therefore, the importance of properly utilizing this human form of life for aiming at the proper target. In other words, there is an aim in life, or a target, or a goal. What is the goal of life? Is underlined in the very first instruction of the Vedanta Sutra. Vedanta Sutra is explaining Atato Brahma Jigyasa. And now that one has been fortunate to acquire this human form of life, one should understand what is the goal of life, or the purpose of life. Prabhupada quotes this a verse in the Bhagavatam also, a very very often quoted by Srila Prabhupada, reminding us, Nate vidu swartha gatim hi Vishnum, that majority of people in the material world don't know what is their swartha gatim. Gati means gati means a road or path. Swartha gatim, swartha. Just like yesterday we were talking about, there is artha and paramartha. We are interested in what is param. Param means Krishna, what is topmost. Just like in the 14th chapter, also in the Bhagavad Gita, that first verse begins with param. Param bhuya pravekshami. Param bhuya pravekshami jnanam jnanamutamam. The topmost of all knowledge, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, I will now again explain to you about the param, topmost, most confidential knowledge, as he had also explained in the 9th chapter. This Raja Vidya. Param bhuya pravekshami jnanam jnanamutamam yad yadva munaya sarve param siddhim ito gataha. Same message is being conveyed here. Param siddhim. Siddhi means perfection. Param, topmost. Topmost perfection, topmost goal of life is to reach the lotus feet of the Lord, or to serve the lotus feet of the Lord. Seva. Seva, therefore, is the topmost activity for the living entity. It is the param dharma. Savai pumsam paro dharmo dato bhaktir. Bhakti is the param dharma. The majority of people have no conception, no understanding, and are falsely engaged in all types of material, temporary pursuits, which are not bringing one to the ultimate goal or destination. So therefore, being introduced or becoming fortunate to take up this process, understanding the importance of this human form of life, is essential for making one's life successful. So Prabhupada gives a few examples in the purport in connection with the concept of a bow and arrow. Bow, arrow, and then what is the target. Just like Arjuna, when he was in Gurukula and training, he, of all the students learning under Dronacharya, he was the best student because he was very fixed and very determined in learning how to use the bow and arrow. So Arjuna became expert in properly utilizing. So in a similar way, we also need to properly utilize these two things, this human form of life, for cultivating this knowledge, cultivating this awareness, and the the most powerful means by which we can utilize this human form of life is through Vedic mantra, through transcendental sound vibration. The topmost transcendental sound vibration being the chanting of Om, or the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So Mahamantra is actually somewhat concealed in the Vedic literatures. Of course, Om is generally more visible. Om is giving us an introduction to the realm of transcendence, and the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is taking us beyond the initial stage of transcendence to the topmost level of transcendence, means understanding about Krishna. So I'll just read the text again before we go to our next one. The 10 kinds of air acting within the body are compared to the spokes of the chariot's wheels, and the top and bottom of the wheel itself are called religion and irreligion. The living entity in the body concept of life is the owner of the chariot. The Vedic mantra, pranava, is the bow. The pure living entity is the arrow, and the target is the Supreme Being. So this is only possible when one develops elevated, purified consciousness. When the living entity is purified, he gives up his bodily conception of life and his false identity as belonging to certain community, certain nation, society, etc. And then he takes the arrow of his purified life, the arrow of his purified life, and with the help of the bow, the transcendental chanting of pranava, or the Hare Krishna mantra, he throws himself toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead. With the help of the bow. Yes. Okay. The next two verses, 43 and 44, are together. Rago dveshastalobhasya shoka moha hayam madaha mana vamano suyacha maya himsa sa matsaraha raja pramada chun nidra chatravas tvaivam adayah. Rajastama Rajastama Prakritaya Tattva Prakritaya Kvachit. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the conditioned stage, one's conceptions of life are sometimes polluted by passion and ignorance, which are exhibited by attachment, hostility, greed, lamentation, illusion, fear, madness, false prestige, insults, fault findings, deception, envy, intolerance, passion, bewilderment, hunger, and sleep. All of these are enemies. Sometimes one's conceptions are also polluted by goodness. Purport. So we have many enemies. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The actual aim of life is to go back home, back to Godhead. But there are many hindrances created by the three modes of material nature. Sometimes by a combination of Rajaguna and Tamaguna, the mode of passion and ignorance, and sometimes by the mode of goodness. In the material world, even if one is a philanthropist, a nationalist, and a good man according to materialistic estimations, these conceptions of life form a hindrance to spiritual advancement. How much more of a hindrance then are hostility, greed, delusion, lamentation, and too much attachment to material enjoyment. To progress toward the target of Vishnu, which is our real interest, one must become very powerful in conquering these various hindrances or enemies. In other words, one should not be attached to being a good man or a bad man in this material world. In this material world, so-called goodness and badness are the same because they consist of the three modes of material nature. One must transcend this material nature. Even the Vedas or the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies consist of the three modes of material nature. Therefore, Krishna advised Arjuna, Traigunya Vishaya Veda. This Traigunya of our Arjuna, yes. Nirdvandvo Nitya Sattvasto Niryaga Niryoga Kshema Atmavan, which is translated as follows. This is from Bhagavad Gita 2:45. The Vedas mainly deal with the subject of the three modes of material nature. Rise above these modes, O Arjuna. Be transcendental to all living, to all of them. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. Elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, Urdhvam gashanti satvasta. If one becomes a very good person, in other words, if one is in the mode of goodness, he may be elevated to the higher planetary systems. Similarly, if one is infected by Rajagun and Tamagun, he may remain in this world or go down to the animal kingdom. But all of these situations are hindrances on the path of spiritual salvation. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore says, okay, yeah. Pramandam pramite kono bhagyavan jiva guru Krishna prasade pai bhakti lata bij. If one is fortunate enough to transcend all this so-called goodness and badness and come to the platform of devotional service by the mercy of Krishna and the Guru, his life becomes successful. In this regard, one must not be very one must be very bold. Yes. In this regard, one must be very bold so that he can conquer these enemies of Krishna consciousness. Not eating for the good or bad, not caring for the good and bad of this material world, one must boldly propagate Krishna consciousness. Yes. So everyone in the material world is in the false conception of good and bad, the duality of the material world, which is heavily under the influence of the gunas, the modes of material nature. Therefore, one must learn by the cultivation of this knowledge how to rise above these modes of material nature. Mana shastrani indriyani prakriti stani karshati. Those who are caught up, conditioned, fully under the control or influenced by these modes of material nature, that means that there is a constant struggle with the mind and the senses. Therefore, one must follow the good instructions in the Shastra, as mentioned in the previous verse. Also, take help from transcendental sound vibration to rise above the dualities of this material world. Yes. So I'll just finish by reading this translation here to text 43 and 44. In the conditioned stage, one's conceptions of life are sometimes polluted by passion and ignorance, which is, especially in Kali Yuga, very, very prominent. the activities of the modern world especially bring out these two features uh, of the modes of passion and ignorance, which are mentioned here actually in the text itself. This is exhibited by uh, uh, different types of material attachment. This is described or exhibited by hostility. Uh, Hostility means becoming becoming mad, or sometimes uh, hostile, becoming uh, destructive uh, towards others or towards nature. So attachment, hostility, greed, lamentation, illusion, fear, madness, false prestige, insults, fault finding, deception, envy, intolerance, passion, bewilderment, hunger, and sleep. These are all symptoms of those living entities still heavily controlled by the Rajagun and Tamagun. Devotee means someone who is uh, rising above these lower modes of material nature uh, through the scientific process, as described in both Bhagavad Gita and Srimad-Bhagavatam. We see in the world today so much of all of these exhibitions of, in so many ways, madness due to ignorance and passion. Symptom of passion, especially, is lobha, greed. It's also mentioned here. Yeah, lobha. So therefore, uh, devotees are meant to uh, transcend these very destructive aspects, which ultimately bewilder the living entity, uh, and the process, especially, is yeah, through the process underlying in the matter of hearing. Yeah. So Prabhupada ends here in the purport. That if one is fortunate enough to transcend all this so-called goodness and badness and come to the platform of devotional service by the mercy of Krishna and Guru, then his life becomes successful. In this regard, Prabhupada continues, one must be very bold so that he can conquer these enemies of Krishna consciousness. So in another place, Prabhupada would explain that to become Krishna conscious means to expect to fight, or that we have to fight against the enemies of Krishna consciousness. It means all of that has been described here. All of the lower levels of consciousness or false understandings, because we are living in the kingdom of Maya. So therefore, Maya is exhibiting all of these false uh, allurements. Yes. And then Prabhupada ends here by telling how, not caring for the good and bad of this material world, one must boldly propagate Krishna consciousness. So that's an important point also, that to whatever extent we have understood something about Krishna consciousness, it becomes, it is for our benefit and the benefit of others also, that we try to share this knowledge of Krishna consciousness. This is very much uh, 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 needed, especially in the world today, where the vast majority of people are simply not having this knowledge or this understanding. So this is the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is the mission of our Vaishnava Acharyas. This is the mission of the Krishna consciousness movement also, to everyday endeavor for cultivating this knowledge, and and then arranging in different ways so that people can understand how to actually put an end to their very precarious, awkward, deplorable uh, situation in this material world, by knowing that there is a goal of life or a purpose of life, and that we need to properly utilize this body which is compared to an arrow, and this properly utilize this bow of transcendental sound vibration, especially the holy name, for aiming at the target, which is reaching or attaining the shelter of the holy feet of Krishna. Yeah. Okay, we can close here for now. Jai Grantaraj Srimad-Bhagavatam ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Gaur Premanandi.